Everybody sees fishing or
That's
whatever.
whatever you want to talk about.
But he has some classics. WGC will be playing
Well, excuse us for that moment of technical difficulty. This is Susan McCord with the Augusta Chronicle. Today we're fortunate to have with us the Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives, David Ralston, and he has brought along with him Augusta Representative Mark Newton and Harlan Representative Barry Fleming. Appreciate y'all coming in.
Thank you very
Good
much.
to see you.
Good morning.
The Speaker of the House has a big job and oversees nearly every aspect of the chamber, and Speaker Ralston has held the title since 2010. He represents the 7th House District and lives in Blue Ridge in North Georgia. And so so what brings you to Augusta today, Mr. Speaker?
Well, first of all, Susan, thank you and the Chronicle for letting us come by and visit. This is part of a several-day visit that we're making across Georgia to talk about what we're doing in state government. I think it's important that we go out in the state, let people know what we did this past session, put that in context over the last few years of what we've done, and talk about what we plan to do. So we've had a good time doing that, and I look forward to a visit with y'all today.
Right. Well, it's impossible to ignore your appearance in the news lately over your use of legislative leave to delay work you're doing in court on cases your private practice is handling. We know lawyers can use this leave, and it allows them to be able to serve in the General Assembly. But some members of your own party are saying that you use it too much and have even called on you to resign. Well, what do you say to those guys?
Well, first of all, it was 9 members of the House that signed the resolution, and I understand their concerns. I think when you look at all the facts on both sides of this issue, which haven't been made public until we've talked about that on this trip too, then I think people understand that, first of all, that when defending people accused of crimes is not a very popular thing to do. I've got another lawyer here. I think he manages to avoid criminal defense work. But it's important. It's part of our system. It's part of what makes us different as a country. People who are accused of crimes are guaranteed certain rights under the Constitution: the right to a trial by jury, the right to the presumption of innocence, and the right to a vigorous and adequate defense by an attorney. And so I have devoted a good portion of my law practice now for 39 years to doing that. I'm very proud of that. I reject those who say that there is some kind of a design or an intentional plan to delay these cases. The way court cases get scheduled is a little bit complicated sometimes, particularly in the criminal system. There's a pecking order that I think most circuits use. I know the ones I practice in terms of giving priority to cases where the defendant is in jail, giving priority to violent felonies, and there's an order to those. At the end of the day, the trial calendar is set by the court, and sometimes the prosecutor, depending on the circuit, has some input into the setting of the calendar. I can assure you that the defense attorney has very little input into that, and so practicing in a rural area, we do not have court terms as often as more populated communities. For example, the circuit that I practice in, we have 3 judges, and they each have 2 weeks of criminal trials each year. And what hasn't been reported is that since I've been speaker, the first 6 years, was a former associate of mine became a judge, which took me out of one of those judge positions. So then I had two judges that I was available for. The way I've compensated for that is to go to the judges. I do this every year. I've already done it since the session. Do it 2 or 3 or 4 times. Sit down if I know I have a conflict with a week coming up, and explain to them and the opposing counsel the nature of my conflict, and volunteer up other weeks for what we call special sets. And so we've tried a number of cases through a special set arrangement. For example, there's about 4 cases that the Atlanta media talks about a lot, and one of those had actually been specially set back in November for this coming summer, and it's going to go to trial the last week of July. The other 3 of those 4 have already been resolved, so we're down to that one now. You know, I guess the final point I want to say is what I promised the members of the House I would do. I went to the well of the House on February the 25th to address this issue, and I told them that, you know, I've learned through this that you're never too old to grow and to learn, and that if the members of the House felt like changes were appropriate to the law, which the basic part of the law has been in place since 1905, so obviously neither of these guys or me had any input into that, and the law was modified in 2006 before I became Speaker. But I told them that, you know, if there are concerns with that law, you know, I was prepared to deal with them. So I appointed a bipartisan, broad range of people, 12 people, to look at some different ways of coming at that law. I had no involvement with their recommendations, and they came back with what I thought was a very, very sound proposal. It passed the House with only 1 dissenting vote, and it passed unanimously in the Senate, and has now been signed into law by Governor Kemp, which will give the judge more ability to deny my request if they see fit to do that, if there is an objection made by opposing counsel, and it sets out the factors that the judge looks at in considering a request and an objection. And the other commitment that I made is that until those 4 cases I talked about were all resolved, that I wouldn't take any more criminal cases, and I haven't. So we're working to take care of those. I'm a great believer that you know, it's not having a problem in life that's what's important, is what you do about it. And so to the extent that there's a perception that that's a problem, then I think we've dealt with it and could.
Just the numbers that the AJC has thrown out, you know, seem kind of high. I mean, more than 1,000 requests they had over the time you've been Speaker. I mean, that doesn't seem like a lot?
That's over 10 years. And you might be interested in knowing that one of the things the AJC did not do, and I'm not here to be critical of them, that's not the point of any of this, but what they failed to do was to compare the continuances that I requested with other lawyers in my circuit. And I was a little interested to find out that I'm not even #1 in my circuit, and I'm kind of in the low range of average in terms of number of continuances requested. If you pile up those numbers, they sound awfully big, but sometimes we don't, as I said earlier, we don't know what cases the the state is going to prioritize. So if you have a number of cases on the calendar and you see a conflict situation coming up with your legislative work, you know, I put in a continuance on all of them. And the case may not even have been planned to go to court, but I don't know whether it is or not. So, and oftentimes it's not. So the data is deceptive that way, which is not surprising. I think the individual who has kind of been out there shopping this data, you know, he admits that he doesn't know whether these were legitimate or not, and he's not an attorney. He tells people he's a former FBI agent. We find out he's an FBI agent for a grand total of 2 years. So some of that I'm sure was taken up with Academy, but you know, you have to understand what it is that you're looking for, and two, I think it has to be said, and again, I don't dwell on this part, that many of the people who are most vocal and most making the most noise about this issue are people that have been opposed to me for years. And once this issue dies down, they'll find another issue because it's the nature of the job I hold.
And I want to ask you about those people. So you're saying there's another lawyer in your circuit that has made more requests to postpone than you? It sounds like a good circuit to be in trouble.
Well, it's not unlike many rural circuits in Georgia.
Yeah, I covered courts in a real rural circuit. I know they do want to get people out of the jails. So one explanation that I've heard is that this is, you know, retaliation by maybe a more conservative wing of the state GOP, you know, because you're so good at working across the aisle. I mean, does any of that ring true?
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. I know that you know, my staff and family will not allow me to go on Facebook. I think that's to keep down my high blood pressure, but I understand that some of the people are out there, and I know that there's a small group that opposed some efforts that we made about 6 or 7 years ago to reform our ethics laws in Georgia. They opposed those. We have I know a former House member who had to resign last year because he displayed his naked rear end in a video on national TV. Has been pretty aggressive, and I'm sure he still is upset that I called for his resignation over that.
Do you think he is behind this in some way?
Oh, I don't know that he's behind it. I'm just saying that you know, part of a group. And you know, my primary opponent from last year, and I have primary opponents. These guys avoid primaries, and they primary me all the time. I've had 3 in a row, and last year the primary opponent, who got a whopping 25% of the vote, has been very, very vocal, and so you know, you'd have to ask them what their motivation is. You know, I've come to realize that there are people in the political process who just want to say no, who just who vote against some of the things that we've tried to do to move the state forward, and you know, we have an honest disagreement about that, and we'll continue, I guess, with a few. I mean, we've got a big caucus. We've got 104 members, and it's like a big family. You know, we don't agree on everything all the time, as you would expect.
I was just thinking, you know, some of them must just want your job, probably. You feel like maybe you're a target.
Well,
of other
I've had that
Republicans who'd like to be
suggested.
speaker?
I've had that suggested to me. And I tell people they don't understand the demands of the job, or they might reconsider that. But you know, you know, the personal attacks on me really don't bother me, because I've been through this before, and I've been through it going back a lot of years. I think the part of this, though, that really troubles me is that the attacks have now gone beyond me to people in my community, judges, prosecutors, all of my constituents. I mean, somebody showed me the other day that some blogger had said that this was all the fault of my constituents because they were weak, that they wanted a friend who had power rather than a principled representative. Well, I hope I'm their friend. That was the best part of that. But you know, how do you deal with that kind of mindset? I mean, you know, I go down and you know, my first obligation as Chairman Fleming and Representative Newton have their primary obligation is to their districts. Chairman Fleming chairs one of the most powerful committees in the House, but that's a secondary to taking care of the people back home, and the same with Mark Newton. You know, and you know, going back to the attacks, and this doesn't get reported, but you know, the former FBI agent has recently said that a lawyer that was in my law firm for about 6 years, no, actually 9 years, judge 6 years, now in the Court of Appeals, that presided over my cases, approved my legislative leave request, and dismissed cases for me. That is so blatantly untrue. I went into that judge's courtroom one time when she was a Superior Court judge, and that was to wave at her because I hadn't seen her on the bench, and she was kind of like a daughter, and so you know, I don't know where this kind of stuff comes from, but that is an attack on her. That is that we just have to call it what it is. It's a lie, and I think, you know, Barry Fleming and I try cases, and you know, there's a principle of law that says that if you find somebody has lied one time, you can disregard their entire testimony. So I think that casts a real shadow on his credibility, frankly.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that little tidbit. Well, so one of the bar complaints did allege that you were taking leave to participate in campaign activities. And should legislative leave cover that type of activity?
Quite frankly, I do not think that there is a problem with me helping my members in their districts. What we try to do, and here's an example. Mark Newton invited me over here last September, October, to help him. He had a race. When I was over here, we went to the Burn Center, we went to the Cyber Center, and I visited those places to kind of see you know, what was going on there, because that's how I learned what goes on out in the real part of the state. And then I did a fundraiser for him that night. So I was asked yesterday, would you quit doing that? And I said, if the other party will quit doing that, and if George Soros will promise that he will not send any more money into Georgia, then I'll think about it. But I'm not going to unilaterally disarm my caucus in the face of these massive amounts of money that are coming in from out of state against my party. So my members call me and expect me, and they've expected every speaker in history that I know of, Speaker Richardson did it, Speaker Murphy did it, to assist in their campaigns.
You're not on legislative leave today, are you?
Well, actually, I didn't have any court scheduled today.
That's good.
Susan, I'd like to say something
Okay.
about a bill that we passed this session that dealt with this issue. This has been one of the most difficult issues that I've had to deal with since I've been in the legislature, because being an attorney, these attacks and accusations I had to take very seriously and do take very seriously. The speaker mentioned that he appointed a panel of citizens, Democrat, Republican, lawyers, non-lawyers, to look at this issue of legislative leave. In this session, the House passed House Bill 502. It was a bill that changed the way that lawyers, and frankly all legislators, but it affects lawyers mostly, deal with this issue of what we call a legislative stay. The purpose of the legislative stay is a separation of powers issue, in my opinion. When I'm in Atlanta doing my duties as a legislator, whether I'm chairman of the Judiciary Committee or Speaker of the House, I can't be required by another branch of government to be kept away from my duties. The reason it affects lawyers so much is because we have to be in court sometime. But we changed that law as it existed, and it addressed some of these criticisms that were levied in this matter. So going forward, if it is a criminal matter particularly, the judge and the prosecutor and the victims can object to any attorney that asks for a legislative stay. And the judge then can weigh the duties of where the legislator needs to be and how important it is to move the case forward. That was probably a flaw that existed in our law, but we meet every year and make changes to our law. I take very seriously these accusations that were made. I focused in the session to address them that way. I appreciate the speaker having come talk about them. They are difficult questions to answer. I think you just heard him say that he has lived through this and learned and will do things differently going forward, and I think that's very important. So I don't want to give the impression that those of us who are lawyers in the legislature don't think that this is a serious matter. We've tried to address it so far, and as this continues, we will continue to try to address it, make changes, make recommendations, and I'm sure that the speaker and I will have another conversation, as well as other lawyers, about this, of where we are and what else needs to be done.
Was the primary change just allowing the judge and prosecutors to possibly object? Were there other changes that the bill?
That was the primary change. And the way the law used to work, the legislative stay, was that if I say to a judge outside of the session, I can't be there for my legislative duties, the judge would, it would be instituted a stay, would stop the case for that particular day or that particular time that I could not be there. Now, if I were to do that, particularly in a criminal case, the judge, the prosecutor, the victims involved can step forward and object to that, and the judge gets to make a decision whether or not the case, hearing, or whatever matter will be delayed. And that is a significant change from Georgia law, the way it used to be. Had that been in place, I don't think we would be sitting here discussing these problems that we're discussing now. And like I said, I take it very seriously, and I'm sure that we will continue to fine-tune that and address this going forward.
Let me say two things, Susan. Chairman Fleming was, I rely on him very, very much on issues like this, and he and I did have conversations. He gave me great counsel, and I want to say publicly how much I appreciate his wisdom, because it is a serious issue. It's a serious issue for the victims and their families. It's a serious issue for the defendants, because they're the ones that have the constitutional rights. I take my obligation to them very serious. Prosecutors take their obligation to victims very serious. That's how the system works. And at the end of the day, decisions get made or resolutions are had that hopefully produce justice. But I have to question, and I really, I don't want to dwell on this much, but I think it's important to really kind of put this in context. You mentioned the bar complaint. I have yet to see the bar complaints. But you know who has them? A talk show host in Atlanta and reporters in Atlanta. I think we even got them from the Atlanta newspaper. So we could address questions they had. The state bar has not sent them to me yet, and I'm not blaming them, but these were distributed out to the media,
Yes, I was tempted to call and see if they would give them to me, but
we can call, well, I won't name names. I'll tell you off the record who you can call to get them. But as of yesterday, one of these bar complaints has supposedly been filed almost 2 weeks. I haven't seen a filed complaint, but we're responding to a complaint that was given to us by the media. Is that about the victim? I submit that it's not, that that's a purely political attack. And I think that raises questions about what is the motive. And you know, the first bar complaint was from and then I pick up a column on Sunday and read that in the first bar complaint that my client has been out on bond since 2008 while the victim is still waiting for her day in court. Let me tell you when that case was finalized, August of 2013. Almost 6 years ago, it's been over. Does that get reported? No. And so, you know, we tried to run down what, you know, how did you make this mistake? Well, you know, it's what the Atlanta media told me. Well, you know what? I think we need to hold y'all to the same standard, or close to the same standard that we hold lawyers and people in the legislature in terms of telling, just giving the facts.
well, politics is a contact sport for sure, especially when you're in a role like you are. Well, I appreciate y'all coming in. That's about all I have.
Do you mind if I could? I know we talked a lot about this, and I appreciated the way it was recognized, even though there were defenses, and I think the speaker appointing that bipartisan panel, the leadership that helped pass that bill, to clarify it going forward, so that there won't be any uncertainty, so that there won't be, I think, was an excellent way to even if you don't think you did anything wrong, if you realize the perception is there, that's important to us too. We're in politics, we serve the people. And it was addressed in an excellent way. Couldn't have happened without the direction or without the support of the speaker, giving the committee freedom to come back with a proposal and then letting it get passed in time to become law. And I believe it became law on the 7th of May. So there's no delay. It's not January. It's not even July 1st. And so the real issues have been dealt with where there was perception. But what I hate is it takes away from some of the fabulous stuff that we did get to accomplish, that we've gotten to accomplish over the last 10 years, the last 3 years that I've been there. We've got the things Georgia needs help on. We did criminal justice reform. We've got 2 stalwart attorneys here that worked with that, and Georgia's a leader in that now. Where do we need to work? We needed to work on transportation. Transportation was addressed and is still being addressed, and we're seeing it with the orange barrels around here in our area, and it's a good thing because we've got a growing area. Cyber is one of the reasons it's growing. Things that wouldn't have happened without the support of both Chairman Fleming and the Speaker of the House. The one person who has the experience there in the State House now, with a new Lieutenant Governor and a new Governor. So I've been excited to work with that. What are some other areas? We need help in education. Passed the largest teacher pay raise this year. We fully funded QBE funding last year. All this is under the leadership of the Speaker, who's a citizen legislator like I am. I'm a physician who unfortunately has to be out of the emergency room during flu season, January, February, and March. It's tough. There's certain advantages to professional politicians who do that for a living and look after their own reelection and their own, running for president or whatever they want to do. But there's some advantages in Georgia and many states to a citizen legislature. So I'm here as a physician, but I go away for 3 months. These attorneys have to practice, and they have to represent people. So I think citizen legislature is a part of it. We made great progress in healthcare this year, a thing that is so crucial to our area with the medical college, the nursing school, PA schools, and all those things. So in education, we made great strides. In healthcare, we're looking at expanded coverage in Georgia. We're looking at key things that wouldn't have happened without the Speaker's leadership on the House, things that we're looking at to expand coverage to those who may not have coverage in Georgia, to come up with affordable solutions, high-risk pools, and things that will be looked at. So in education and healthcare and criminal justice and in transportation, and for us in cyber here in the eastern part of Georgia, I think we've got so many good things going on. Others would like to distract us from those and have us talk about something else that sounds like at least one of them I know sounded like it was an ongoing thing, settled in 2013. Some people would like to detract from the progress that's being made and maybe take Georgia in a different direction. I'm proud to work with the Speaker, without whose support Eastern Georgia, here where we are in the CSRA, but frankly all of Georgia, would not be making the progress we're making. And I'm just excited about getting started with both getting that message out, but also coming up with our plans for the next session. I think we have a good team. We have a great leader. I'm very supportive and appreciate what it's meaning, not just to my district, although obviously, as Chairman Fleming said, and the Speaker said, that's a key thing for each of us, is to represent our district well. But I can tell you the direction we're going is good for all of Georgia, and I'm just excited that we're at a point now where I think when people realize House Bill 502 has been passed, it's been signed, it's in effect, these questions have been raised, legitimately addressed, legitimately answered. Now, we've got a lot of other important things. I have a study committee on maternal mortality where Georgia doesn't do well. We're looking at ways to expand affordable care across Georgia, two of my interests. I'm just excited for us to get going and to start talking about those things that the Speaker has been a key part in leading and being really a blessing to Georgia.
Susan, along the lines of what Representative Newton said, to that matter, these bar complaints that you mentioned, there is a process whereby they will be considered. There will be answers. Someone will look at these issues. Just like during the session, we passed the House bill that we've mentioned to change this issue of legislative stay going forward. I can guarantee you, if the questions come out as this bar complaint goes through, myself and Representative Newton will be two of the first people to go to the Speaker to tell him that you need to address this and you need to answer these questions. So far, he has done that, and the House bill is an example of that. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that we don't take these accusations seriously, and that we won't continue to watch this situation as it develops and ask our Speaker to address these things as it goes forward. But as Representative Newton says, I also want the public to know that there are a lot of things that did happen this past session. He mentioned the teachers' pay raise. We are poised to cut taxes again in Georgia. We have a booming economy. I was very involved with one of the most fundamental things we do as a government, and that is our voting system. We passed a bill this session. In this session, I will thank the Speaker for his help, and the Governor and the Lieutenant Governor and the Secretary of State for passing a bill that will reform the way we handle elections in Georgia, bring us into a new era, new voting machines, that the public will be able to have confidence in our election system going forward. So two things, we're addressing these concerns and we'll continue to address them as they arise about this situation we've discussed, but we also at the same time need to talk about some of the successes that we've had.
Anybody else?
Well, let me just sort of wrap it up this way, and I want to thank again Chairman Fleming and Representative Newton for taking time out of their day to be here. I'm more than happy to deal with this. I get set in my ways sometimes, and so I think we all tend to get, when things first happen, get a little defensive. I probably got a little defensive. I've learned that that's not the proper way of dealing with it, and that's why I went to well of the House and tried to be as candid and transparent with the members of the House as I could be, and I will continue to do that. But at the same time, we have work to do. And, you know, one of the things that I've been most proud of the last 4 or 5 years in the House is that we have used the off-season after the end of one session to the beginning of the next to really drill down in some issues that we don't have time to drill down into during a 40-day session. We've done it with rural development, we've done it with school safety, we've done it with transportation, and Representative Newton touched on one of those, which was his resolution this session to look at the issue of maternal mortality. That's the kind of thing we need to be looking at. We have another effort going on to reform the way we deliver mental health services in Georgia. We're way behind the curve on that, and we've got so many unmet needs with that. We're the worst state in the nation in maternal mortality. You know, we're going to kind of drill down into that in the off season and see how did we get here and what can we do to get out of that. That's what we need to be talking about. Freight and freight logistics is another area that's very, very critical. We just appointed the members of the Freight Logistics Commission yesterday. I appointed an Augusta, Rick Toole, to that group. Have a lot of respect for him, very knowledgeable about the industry, and looking at how we can move freight about in the state and get products out of all of Georgia down to the port in Savannah, take the big trucks off the highways, and as part of our ongoing effort to improve our infrastructure and our transportation system here in the state. Those are things we're going to be working on this summer and fall.
Sounds good. Today we've been live with the Speaker of the Georgia House, David Ralston, as well as Representative Mark Newton and Representative Barry Fleming. And we appreciate y'all coming in here today and taking time to really address these issues. I guess we will wrap things up. This is Susan McCord of the Augusta Chronicle.